Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Grumpy Roadie. I'm your host for this episode, Steve Klink, and with me, as always, is our producer, Chris Mills. Chris is a video engineer who's been teching and touring all over the world for the past 30 years. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the show that isn't afraid to talk about anything. And today we are proving that again, as our subject is mental health within the live event industry. Be aware that adult subject matter and language may be used. As a matter of fact, I can pretty much guarantee it's going to be used. So, yeah, well, I know I'm not trying to scare you all, but you should know what you're getting yourselves into here.
He's been practicing his curse words all day long, so he's ready and armed.
Oh, I'm so ready to crack them out, but I'm gonna resist just for right now. So, as most of our viewers know, we work in an industry that is very deadline driven, and we live and die by the code of the show must go on. That code, however, can create chaos in many other parts of our lives. To work in this industry, one must understand this is no 9-to-5 gig. We are working at all times of the day to bring together professional products, whether that be on a theater stage, on the stage of your favorite concert venue, or for a conference. Many of us prioritize our work over our personal lives, and I know that I'm guilty of that. I won't speak for you guys, but I know that I'm guilty of it. What's left can be an aftermath of broken friendships, broken promises to our families, and of course, ex-lovers. But the friendships that we have in this industry are so solid that we often become family to one another, since we're working together for long hours at a time and often for long durations, whether that's just on one particular gig or if we're on months together on the road together. To get a more in-depth perspective on this subject, I'd like to introduce today's guests. Our first guest is Mark Hartshorn from Toronto. Mark is a salesman who's been in the industry for over 30 years. Let's try that again. Mark is a salesman who's been in the industry for over 30 years. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be here.
Excellent. Next, we have Crystal Carew, who is a freelance camera operator from Toronto. Crystal has shot in camera for many various events, including a tour with David Gilmour from Pink Floyd. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Crystal.
Thank you.
Excellent. Next, we're not done yet. Our next guest is Adam Thomas from Burlington. Adam is a freelance tech that I've worked with for over the past 10 to 12 years. Thanks so much for joining us, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. We are still waiting on two other people, but we are going to get started anyways. Our producer, Chris, will keep an eye on the waiting room, and here we go. So it's all well and good to talk about mental health and the challenges that we face. However, I'm not personally qualified to speak to the issue as a professional. Our special guest for today is psychotherapist Dan Block from Serene Living Counseling in Oakville, Ontario. Dan is here to offer some perspective and suggestions for all of us during these trying times. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being here, and thanks for the invite.
No, thanks for taking the time to be with us. We really do appreciate it.
Happy to help.
Excellent. Okay, so now that we got everybody, let's get down to brass tacks. This industry chews up people and spits them out like no other industry I'm familiar with. Well, there's a few that may be comparable, but let's face it, this can be pretty brutal on us and our loved ones, for many, many different reasons. Let's start off with some common misconceptions about the industry as a whole. Trying to explain what we do to our loved ones is challenging at best, unless they themselves are in the industry. This being said, does anyone in your families actually understand what we do every day? Let's start off with Adam on this one.
When I was married, my wife was very, very understanding in regards to what I did. She even accompanied me on shows. But I put in simple guidelines, like if it was corporate, you're not coming. If it was rock and roll, you're coming. And she completely understood that.
Okay.
Completely understood it.
Well, that's good to have, to be in an environment where you can actually have your partner there. I know that for myself in the corporate environment, that is not very easy to accomplish.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what about you, Crystal?
I try, and they understand some aspect of it, but they don't understand the long hours or what really goes into it. You can only explain so much without actually making them do the work themselves. So Not entirely, but they do understand a little bit.
Okay. All right. And now, Mark, I know that your wife is in the industry, but your kids aren't. So, your kids, do they really get what you and your wife do every day, or are they kind of oblivious to it?
A little oblivious. I mean, they get it. They understand that every spring, every fall, every year, I may or may not be home for a long stretch. My wife doesn't work the hours she used to, so there's always somebody around. But no, they kind of think it's cool what we do, and it's nice when I have a day off in the middle of the weeks. But yeah, they get it.
That's good to hear. I mean, I could personally say that my family really doesn't get it. And maybe that's my own fault for just not describing it better or just not being in a position to really share with them what the experience is like. To give you an example of that, my mom once said to me, I was at the garden show the other day and saw a cable that was taped down on the ground. And I know that you do that. Very, very, very proud moment, I gotta say. And hasn't quite made it onto my resume yet, but it's going there. Oh yeah. Anyways, yeah. What can I say? It's unless you're in it or you have a chance to really experience it with your family members, it's no one really gets it. I know that Dan gets it because he's been a presenter, so he's been on the other side of it. So I'm very thankful that we've got a professional here that really does understand what we do every day. So,
I've rarely been accused of being a professional.
Oh, actually, that's not just on your business card, Dan Block, professional.
Oh, name only.
Okay, all right, nice. So, guys, now that we're in a holding pattern here for the foreseeable future in terms of when our industry is going to start up again, let's talk about how everyone is adjusting to this new lockdown environment that we're all in and how we're trying to cope. I know that a lot of you, just like me, we're not built to just sit around or anything like that, which is probably why this show is, part of my own tactic for coping. But let's start with Crystal for this. Crystal, what are you doing these days to keep yourself occupied?
I'm actually pretty good at keeping myself occupied because as much as I work like a crazy person, crazy busy, I also have periods of time when I'm actually dead. So like March is usually really slow for me. I'm busy in January, February, March, and beginning of April is slow. So this is just a little longer than I'm used to. But my day to day is I get up, I make breakfast, I have my little things I do, my little hobbies and stuff. And actually, it's dinner time and that's it. Like I'm pretty good. I know some people out there are really struggling right now to keep their mind active, and they're like, I miss going out and stuff. But I'm a bit of an introvert, so I kind of have a lot of things that I can deal with.
That's good. I mean, believe it or not, I'm an introvert as well. Although many of you may not actually believe that, but for me, I don't know. It's the sleep schedule that's just gone completely out the window for me. And,
the sleep schedule on a normal basis is out the window. So.
Excuse me, guys. What is a sleep schedule?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before, honestly.
Okay, yeah, that's a very.
But I gotta say, I gotta agree with Crystal on something here, because like for me, I've noticed it's not much has changed in my day-to-day thing as well in the at-home mode. When I'm on the road, it's a totally different operating mode. But when you come home off the road, then you just sit in your house for a couple of days because you don't want to go fucking out of the door anyway. So doing this is not an unusual burden of anything. It's just a prolonged off day series, basically.
Yeah, it's kind of the Groundhog Day of a prolonged off day in some respects. But I don't. I'm struggling at times too. Even just what the hell day is it again? Because
but I think people. I think people that are used to going to the office and sitting in a cubicle every day have a harder time struggling with this than we do.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Quite honest.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Mark, you're still technically working, right? So I was wondering if you could tell me, has anything really changed with your day-to-day routine as far as what you're doing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of work to be done. We're trying a bunch of things, but so much of our world has gone away. So my work day can usually be done in about an hour, whatever that might be, a few emails here and there. So yeah, we're doing the best we can, but honestly, the days just seem to be flying by now. It's like you said, Groundhog Day over and over. Get up, do my thing, do a little bit of work, play a video game, and before you know it, it's dinner time and bedtime. So that's the thing I've really noticed. It's starting to really become a drag. You know, it was okay for the first 3 or 4 weeks, but now I'm into 6 or so. So I'm getting antsy.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. How about yourself, there, Adam? I know that you were working a little bit, and if you want to share that story of your work experience, by all means, because it's a very interesting one.
Yeah, definitely. So I did land a job because I can't sit. I hate sitting around. So I landed a job over at Cogent Power in Burlington. They manufacture cores for electricity distribution. So basically taking metal off of one skid, putting it onto another. The company hid the fact that there was a gentleman that came down with COVID-19. Depending on which manager you spoke to, it was either 3 weeks, it was 4 weeks, it was 2 weeks, it was a week. So at that point, it was like, you know what? I can't go through with this. Like, I'm not going to jeopardize my life to earn a measly $18, $19 an hour type thing to keep myself busy. So what I've done is I've gotten into a whole bunch of remodeling projects around the house. Just recently installed a studio into my basement, installed a bar into the basement, been working on gutting my garage and redoing the walls in that. Lots of cleaning, walking the dog type thing. Anything that I can do to pass the time so I'm not sitting here twiddling my thumbs, because even after a week-long gig or a month-long gig, I still find it hard to sit around.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, to a degree, anyways. It just depends on how much the gig takes out of you. You know, as far as how demanding it is.
No, I'm always go, go, go. You know, hey, we got to get this done, got to get this done, got to get that done. So it doesn't matter how demanding the gig is. I'm always going. So I find it very hard to sit around. So thank God for all these little projects to do around the house.
Well, it sounds like you guys, for the most part, are coping pretty well. But so, Dan, now that you've heard some of these opinions from everyone, is there any advice you could possibly offer us that might make things a little bit easier for us day to day?
No, it certainly varies from individual to individual as far as, I've heard from some of you, you're more introverted. I heard from some of you, you need to be going and you're more outgoing all the time. So everybody ticks a little bit differently, and what keeps them going varies. So, for the introverted folks, whether it's reading or doing puzzles or whatever occupies your mind. I know there's a lot of TV watching going on, and if that helps you not start drinking at 8:30 in the morning, that's perfectly good too. And for those of you that are outgoing and active, it's a really tough time because you can't be outside, you can't be driving around as much as you want to do. I know for myself, I took my bike that I normally ride, and it's sitting on a trainer in the home. It's not quite the same. So staying motivated while you're, you don't have the things going by outside or stopping to talk to people, that can be difficult. I am starting to see more and more neighbor socializing. So, everybody's kind of on their own driveway, a good 10 feet apart, but still having, some kind of social communication. So the key is to avoid isolation. Even if you're introverted, you want to be having communication. You want to be having social interaction. Another big one we're seeing are Zoom parties and Zoom bars and all kinds of social interaction through distance media and games being played. So even adults are doing this. I participated myself in one last weekend, at Jackbox.tv. And it's all kinds of games you guys can play together remotely, and you can tell lies to each other and figure out which one's telling the truth. You can do kind of weird remote dating things through it. I can't remember the name of that game, but anyway, point being, there's still opportunity to interact with people and continue to do that. Avoid the isolation as much as possible, even for people who are okay to be on their own completely.
I gotta say though, like the Zoom and the Google Meet and whatever, like I'm actually almost more social now than I normally am when I have free time.
And good or bad, what's been your experience with that?
It's okay. I mean, it's good because I end up seeing like my really close friends and family from away, and it's more than I normally get to see them. So I'll take it.
Hey, and listen, for an introvert, you're always empowered. You can just hit leave.
Yeah. I gotta go. Sorry.
You know,
That's the ultimate hang up.
yeah, you know, the funny thing that just occurred to me, in this time where there's no shows going on, what do? We go and make our own.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Would you expect anything less from this bunch of people? I mean,
Yeah.
Really.
Hey, the show's got to go on, right?
Yeah.
yeah, hell.
So I'm curious to know though. I mean, obviously, like, and Crystal kind of brought up this point in her comments, in that if you don't live very close to certain family members, it can be very hard for some of us to not be able to physically visit or hug people during this isolation. Some people really do thrive on that physical touch aspect of things. And you know, I'm curious to know, Dan, what your thoughts are on this as far as long-term effects of not being able to visit loved ones. Whether this is something we should be looking at as a society as we kind of come out of the lockdown, when that actually happens. Because as great as some of these things are, there's also the other part of the communities out there, namely more like senior citizens that have phobia about technology or not familiar with the technology enough to know how to use it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in one of your previous shows, you kind of addressed that there's lots of change that's probably going to be sustaining outside of the immediacy of self-isolation. And communication, touch, the whole work paradigm of, you know, how much more is there going to be that's done remotely, retail shopping, you know, how comfortable are you going to be being jammed in beside someone in a movie theater? There's a lot that's going to shift. And I'm sure we've all been touched. I know I certainly have, with, you know, elderly parents and their friends, where people are in homes and have caught COVID. And we've had a few people in our network pass away. It's a very difficult situation all around. And I think the answer to your question is, how does it change moving forward? And I think it changes moving forward by us having to take a greater responsibility for seniors. And that might mean enabling seniors, whether, you know, if you have parents in a home and they have no access to a device, maybe you're going to get them a cheap device and make it as simple as possible for them to just, when it rings, accept the ring, and they can have a conversation. It's going to be about creating a social network around those people, being able to make sure that they have support when you can't be there personally, but yet they're still in a home surrounded by other people. Things are going to shift.
Well, that's good to hear, because I know that, and this is a topic that you could almost make an entire show out of alone. You know, not specifically for our industry or anything like that, but just what has been happening in the nursing homes and such, or retirement villages and stuff like that, within both the Canada and the U.S. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know, now, there is also the whole thing of us, we travel for months on end, you know, the people in our home expect us to be away at certain times, kind of like what Crystal mentioned. You know, like March is always kind of like a downtime. You're usually around during that time of the year. But now that we're all kind of stuck together, and maybe Mark, you can maybe speak more to this. Has there been any sort of new strain or anything like that, as far as being at home a little bit more with your family on a consistent basis? You know, whether that's just your partner or your kids or anything like that. You know, in some ways, when we're traveling for work and everything like that, we kind of become tourists in our own families in some respects. So what are your thoughts on that?
There hasn't been a lot of change. The one thing I have noticed, especially with the kids, my kids are older, the ones that are home, they're, what are they, 18 and 20 now. they're getting antsy to get out. We can't get out to do anything, and that's so we're all stuck in our own place and we all settle into our daily routine. But no, it hasn't been any additional strain. I guess I'm lucky. I can see that being a strain. We have a big enough place where we can all sort of filter off and do our own thing most of the time.
Well, that's good to hear. I know that for myself, I'm in competition currently with my wife as far as for quiet time in the house, which is kind of an odd thing to say. But for those of you that don't know, she's a teacher. So she is currently recording lessons and stuff like that to be able to post online for her students, in which she's doing a lesson per day as well as other miscellaneous things online for her school. So, and she just happens to be one of the people that is actually tech savvy enough to be able to do that. So, needless to say, it's been kind of weird. We don't live in a full house, so we kind of have to, go for long walks at times to make sure that we're not getting in each other's ways. So, but yeah, it's something. But anyways, I want to move on to the next topic here, and I'd like to discuss this attitude that's very prevalent in the industry of "suck it up." What I mean by that is, you do what you need to do to get the job done, and stop complaining. And we've all heard it many, many times, and it becomes a mantra for a lot of us as far as how we live our lives. And sometimes this can bleed into other aspects of our lives with, not always great results. So, some of us have taken measures to make sure that we don't fall off that proverbial cliff. But how much is enough? That's what I'd like to know. And I'd like to start off from hearing from Adam on this. How much is enough before we really got to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, now it's time, we got to rest. We got to say no for just a little bit.
Honestly, I don't think I've ever met that match. I don't think I've ever crossed that bridge. I'll keep on taking it. I keep on taking it in the sense that you do whatever it needs to be done so that you can get that job done, right? And I guess that's sort of sad in some ways, because when you look at the whole career, the job's got to get done, right? Even if you look at your personal life, everything's got to get done. And that's, I guess, my problem that I've got now, where I don't like sitting around. There's so much to get done, right? So all these little projects I've been doing, it sort of tails and boils down to that, right? Like it
Well,
I don't think there is a limit.
It's interesting you say that, because like personally, I hit a limit myself a couple years ago where I just had to stop,
Right.
But the hardest part with that was granting myself the permission to stop. And that I think is something very difficult for people that are driven like us, for the kind of environment that we live in. Does anyone else on the panel have any experience with that, as far as like having to physically just say, no, that's enough, and I'll come back when I need to?
I've kind of like realized the havoc it was having on my mental health, and I was just like, I've taken a step back a little bit and try to take my mental health in more consideration than most people do. I notice it all the time, in regards to like sleep and working yourself to the bone, and it's not worth it. Like you're just gonna have a breakdown, and it's not worth it. So like over the past few years, I've started to say no to certain things, and like I have my limits. I don't do overnights anymore because it's too hard. It's too hard on me, right? So it takes me too many days to recover, and I don't want to do it.
Well, I think
don't think any of us want to do overnights.
No, but it really for a few days it's really hard on me. So I just don't do it anymore, and it's different things like
That's
that.
awesome.
Yeah.
I'll remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, everybody's got to find their own limit. They got to find out, how much can I and am I willing to tolerate for the job, for the paycheck, for the roof over my head and the food on the table. And the thing is, like, I tried before dialing back for a relationship. That totally backfired as well, but that's a different story. But now I find myself, it's a lot easier for me nowadays to kind of delegate physically demanding tasks. When you look like Grizzly Adams or Uncle Jesse, then it's a lot easier to get some 20-year-old kid to do the heavy lifting for you, right? So that's become a way for me to avoid having to draw that line or having to slam my fist on the table. I just kind of cleverly delegate the work away to stagehands or to younger colleagues, But where I do find myself drawing a line is when other people, especially like younger techs or stagehands, are being exploited and pushed beyond their own limits, and they don't have the knowledge or the ability or don't see themselves in the position to speak up and say no, just because they're too young, too intimidated, too in need of the paycheck or whatever it may be. It takes a little experience and a little bit of spine in a situation like that to step up and say, no, I'm not going to do this. I've reached my limit. I need to break, or I need to step out, get some fresh air or whatever.
Yeah, but it also takes a lot of like self knowledge too to know when you need that break.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's a learning process. When you're 20 and hungry, you think you're invincible and you can do anything on the planet. So it's just fairly natural for the younger techs to kind of undermine their own best interests, basically.
Interesting. What about you, Mark? Have you got any comments on that?
Well, having been in this industry forever, I mean, it's not for everybody, that's for sure. It's all the guys that I've worked with, and I've worked with a number of people who've been around as long as I have. We've all kind of found our own tolerance and our own balance, how much we can do. I've never had to say no to something, but I've found ways to just kind of pull back over the years and do as much as I can, because that's what the job takes. Failure is not an option. It sucks to say that, but we're in the live event industry. You get one shot at it. So, and any failure point in a show is a big deal. So we're always striving not to be that failure point, and that puts a lot of additional stress on it. So we're a special breed, and those of us that survive it and manage through it are, at the end of it, I hope we're better for it, but we're all here, so who knows?
Yeah, well, you bring up a really great point though about that expectation, and that can weigh on your shoulders awfully heavily.
That's what really hits me day to day, and just like you, a few years ago, I had hit a point where I had to revisit everything, and that's a big part of it. It's the expectation, but really, there's no other way. You can't be half-assed in a live show. And so if we accept that, then we have to accept the shit with the sugar, as they say. So.
Yeah, well, it ends up being that you're the one that changes, not the job.
Yeah.
As far as that's concerned. And I know that's how it was for me as well. So now, as you guys know, I love to joke around, and certainly laughter helps. In this industry, I mean, hell, we've gotten through some pretty terrible days just joking around with each other, just for the fact that we can know that what we're doing is just so shitty at times. and you're just like, what the hell am I doing this for at 4 a.m. in the morning? And and then you go off and you do another 15-hour day or anything like that. But what I want to talk about now is about when that laughter stops. And to get really serious here, and I'm not normally known to be this serious myself, I am talking about suicide. Now, we have lost some people over the years. I'm sure all of us have in one way or another. And I think that with the current lockdown environment that we have right now, it's something that we have to be even more aware of. So, we only talk about this a lot of times because it's almost a closeted issue. And the only time we really talk about it is when it's too late, which is, not right. And there's a lot of factors that contribute to that, quite obviously. But, why are we so afraid to ask for help? That's what I would really like to know. So, you don't have to have your own personal experiences to relate to this or anything like that. But I would like to see who would like to tackle this question first.
think I want to think about it for a second.
It's pretty heavy, I realize, and granted, it's not like I completely prepared you guys on this particular subject or anything like that. But to live up to the moniker of the show's motto being that we're not afraid to talk about anything, well,
One thing I would say is, in suicide is one thing, but depression is the more common thing that's going to hit a lot more people that we know. And
absolutely.
in my experience, sliding into a deep depression is a very personal thing, very personal struggle. It's all in your head and dark thoughts and whatnot. With the situation we're in, and it's not just us, it's not just our industry, it's a whole bunch of people who are struggling through this. I think the silver lining is that everybody's aware that this is a problem. They're talking about it, in the States and whatnot, that if this goes on for 6 or 12 more weeks, well, the mental health challenges are going to just escalate. So I think before we get too deep and dark, I think that's a good thing that we can sit here and talk. I'm sure there are people watching this that are going, yeah, right on. And so I hope that's going to make it a little bit easier on people, hopefully not to slide down as far as they might have without any support or anybody to talk to about it.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree on that. Like when you get into a really deep depression, you don't want to reach out because you feel like you're a burden. You don't want to, you feel like you're weak and you're a burden on people and you don't want to, interrupt people's lives or whatever. So it's just, no matter how logical it means, and know how many times like you should reach out and talk to somebody or like tell somebody, hey, I need some help. It's super hard. I don't know what's going to change it, but hopefully in the future it gets a little bit more acceptable and we realize it's not a burden.
Yeah, the funny thing is I've noticed two things when I try reaching out. For one, I find it so hard on myself because it requires me admitting that I have a weakness, that I need help. So it's kind of like emphasizing my issue to myself is one hand, and secondly, whenever you do reach out, more often than not, you're either encounter with what Steve said earlier, that suck it up kind of attitude, or that people try to cheer you up with some kind of joke, humorous thing, measure, whatever, just trying to kind of think you're just in a bad mood. They don't understand the difference, it's not a momentary thing. But it's basically, the difference between weather and climate on a mental health kind of stage, It's not a momentary day-to-day changing thing. It's an overlying condition that kind of overarches the entire dynamics.
I think that vulnerability as well is something that can be very difficult. Like you're saying, Chris, the admission part of it, is one of the more difficult parts. Now, I'm going to throw this section over to Dan, and I'm going to bring up some slides here too. Dan, you take it as you need to. You submitted some stuff to us here specifically about suicide, but if you want to make this a little bit more relatable to how the conversation has kind of gone, we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, maybe we talk before we kind of go to the slide. The slide is really informational purposes for your audience to be able to both identify with, understand risk factors, and then also some resources that they can reach out to. And you brought up some great points, depression, in some cases also anxiety. And you often see what we call comorbidity, which is both of them going on at the same time. And that suicide is, sort of glossed over as an unacceptable topic. And in fact, the majority of the clients that I speak to in therapy who are depressed are kind of relieved, although maybe shocked in some cases when you bring it up and ask the question, have you been thinking about alternatives, and has suicide crossed your mind? And, we'll see a wide variety of reactions, but at the end of the day, there's usually some level of relief to be able to have a conversation about it because you're in an environment that's safe and it's not, there's no judgment around, that as a thought. And it's not unusual for people to say, you know what, I'm in pain, I'm sad, and this seems like an alternative that I should ponder in my mind as, you know, a possible solution. And I guess what I'm here to say is, I understand that way of thinking, but I'm not obviously a proponent of ending one's life as a mechanism for ending pain, because really you're not ending pain, you're transferring pain. And so you're taking the pain that you are experiencing and you're ending it, but all the people around you, they take on that in one form or another. And the closer people are to you, the more of that pain they will experience. So instead, I would be an advocate of getting help. And there's a wide variety of resources to do that. And you know, those, Steve, when you get ready to share, we can talk about those. But I think it's also important to recognize that when you're depressed, what are some of the other factors that might lead to what we call suicidal ideation? So thinking about suicide. And a lot of those factors are going on right now for everyone, right? So any kind of significant personal loss or a crisis, this is certainly a crisis for many people, if not just financial, maybe losing someone they know or someone is sick. It certainly can be traumatic depending on what your experience has been through COVID-19. We're certainly all somewhat isolated from other people. Those are also high risk situations, and any kind of like chronically stressful social condition of which, you know, typically you might look at something like poverty or homelessness or addiction issues. But this can be a chronically stressful situation to be living in. I mean, imagine if you're in a relationship that was rocky before you're stuck, you know, at home with that person over and over again, right? That's certainly not a small part of what we're dealing with now is helping couples, if you will, survive each other as we get through this self-isolation period. So
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if the divorce rate certainly spiked after this.
For sure. I know my friend's neighbor, they were getting divorced and then it, so they're all stuck in the house together, the kids. And
Ooh, that must suck.
yeah, it's got to be terrible.
You know, when you're looking forward to that divorce coming through and you can finally rid of that nagging other half of yours, and then you get locked in a room for the next 6 months with them. That's like the ultimate poetic justice in a way, I guess.
Terrible.
Well, that's very true. So, you know, as we look
Could be with
now,
your ex too.
sorry, what's that?
That somebody could be with your ex right now too, right?
That's a very good point too. Yes, that's just compounding more stress to the situation. Absolutely. Ugh, God, I don't know. I don't want to even go there in my mind. To be
I'm
quite
sure
honest.
there's a couple of rom-coms in the making right now.
Yeah, something like this could very well change the landscape of entertainment. It's changed the landscape of everything else. So why wouldn't that be affected?
Yeah.
So, as we look to try and get back to some normalcy, you know, we're starting to see some places are lifting lockdowns and such. Say what you will, whether it's too early or not. But one thing we should talk about is, you know, that these workers that have been on the front lines are also going to need probably some time to recover as well. Personally, I think there's a pretty big possibility that we could be seeing a lot of people develop PTSD-like symptoms from this, from what they've been seeing. Whether I'm thinking more of the medical profession, of course, versus something like someone who's working in a grocery store or anything like that. But as we step into the future a little bit, when we're all back at work and it's been a long time since we've actually done what we do, and we're probably going to forget some of our skills too. I'd like to know from Dan, is there anything that maybe we should keep in our minds when we return back to our jobs, just to help us out, whether that's expectations on ourselves or anything else that you might think of?
yeah, I don't even know that you need to wait till this is over or you're back at your jobs. You know, in the U.S., the populace there is very appreciative and thankful to anyone who's been in military service. And you often hear the phrase "Thank you for your service." And you know, I would suggest right now that applies to from all of us to anyone on the front lines supporting, humanity day to day in some of these more difficult jobs. And when you're on the front lines, it's the simple things like having to wear a mask all day, and you end up with bruises, skin abrasions, all kinds of difficulties that you don't think about when you're not in a mask all day, and there's no opportunity to take it off until you get home. And when you're back the next day at work, you're right back into another 12-hour shift with that mask on. They're experiencing some really difficult challenges. So my point being, we don't have to wait until we're out to start with finding interesting ways to thank people for their service. I know, for example, people who are volunteering to the cafeterias in hospitals aren't open. So the workers have challenges, being able to get meals in their 12-hour shifts. There are people who are volunteering to bring food to those people, putting food together in, food banks for people who don't have access to food. So, I would encourage all of us to do something here and now to show our gratitude and to be thankful, to give those people support, even if it's just a shout out or emotional support, even in a digital medium or online. But certainly once we get out, those people are going to need a break, which means we need to have some understanding. So when we need access to medical services, we need to be understanding that these are people who have been worked to the bone. We got to be a little patient. We're that anyway in Canada because the healthcare system forces us to be extremely patient to get aid and services. I'll leave that one alone. And again, anything you can do to help, that's what you got to do. I also recommend a program we have here, in my work is we offer up, if you have elderly parents living in the community where I live and you can't get there, but I can help go get groceries for them or something like that, I'm willing to volunteer to do that. So we have that as a, employee program that everyone kind of says, I'm in this area. If you have friends or family who need help, I'm happy to do that.
That's really great to hear. And that's actually something that I had heard before when I was in San Diego, just before all this kind of broke loose. One of the things that the local union was planning on doing for their members was actually putting together a food bank of sorts, so that some of their members that had maybe already lost a lot of work at that point would have a source that they could go to where there wouldn't be as much association with shame or anything like that as far as being able to get that. But what I really liked what you brought up there, Dan, is the cafeteria part, because I think a lot of people that are working in that industry rely on that an awful lot for their meals and their snacks and everything else. That's got to be a huge disruption to their daily routine as it is, already on top of a very difficult situation. So that was very, very good. Now we're starting to run out of time here. So at this point, I'd just like to thank everyone for their time today. And I really hope that this experience was informative and that you all keep fighting the good fight. I'd like to say a special thank you to psychotherapist Dan Block for joining us today. Dan, as we wrap up today, are you able to share with us some resources available to us where we can maybe find some useful information on mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and hopefully you can share the links on the slide as part of the Zoom call here. But certainly if you're in crisis, we definitely suggest 911. Obviously going to the hospital at this point in time is a measured risk. So you're going to think about how dire is my situation and am I willing to put myself in an environment where exposure to COVID could be higher. But nonetheless, if you're in dire need, physical health and mental health are closely related, and a hospital is a viable option. We also have special lines dedicated to kids help, and you see the number there on the screen. Telehealth is another option from a screening perspective. But one of my favorite resources is Connects Ontario, and Connects Ontario really targets all generations, from the youngest people to the most elderly people, and certainly younger generations are more comfortable in the digital medium, and they offer both chat and email as an alternative to Connect, in addition to the phone number there. So I encourage you to reach out to www.connexontario.ca, and Connects is spelled CONNEX, to get access to resources if you feel you need them. And for those just looking for information, whether it's for themselves or others, we've included a couple of 3 links there that provide some great information where you can get more information about suicide prevention.
Excellent. And Dan, I know that when we spoke earlier this week, we were talking a little bit too that for our American viewers, that maybe a source to possibly check out would be the state governmental website as well for support. Is that pretty much in line with what you can possibly think of for recommendations south of the border?
Yeah, there's a lot of great resources out there. In fact, there's more in the U.S. Than we have here in Canada. And I'm happy to offer up, Steve, if any of your viewers need help locating resources, they can contact you, let me know what part of the U.S. they're in, and I'm happy to connect them with the resources they need.
Well, great. Thank you so much again for joining us, Dan. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. Okay, everyone. Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode of Grumpy Roadie. I want to say thank you again to all of our guests and our viewers. You can watch this episode on our YouTube channel, where we welcome your comments and suggestions for other topics you'd like to see discussed. If you like what you hear, please remember to subscribe to the channel. You can visit our Facebook page as well for industry news, polls, and other interesting tidbits. Once again, if you like what you see, give us a like. It's not going to hurt you. For everyone here at Grumpy Roadie, this is Steve Klink saying slip on those walking shoes and beat away those isolation blues. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thanks all.
so
Nice to
much.
meet you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Where did Jim end up?